With the release of Black Myth Wukong, as well as how successful it is overall theme, especially, the discussion have popped up once again about why a Chinese game better than American or Western style, and in some cases any Japanese games. And a lot of the discussion is wrapped around a lot of racism, a lot of bigotry, as well as just pure out sexism. And I am here to discuss why exactly the games are successful, and I promise you it have nothing to do with wokeness, no matter how much you want to tour that monitor around for Western games or Japanese games, appeal to China, giving you what you want with your sexy boys and girls, and I promise you that is not the real reason. So with that, let's go ahead and hop into why exactly is Chinese games are popping off right now, and why are pretty much every single one of them coming over here to the West have been successful as long as Amazon not involved, and why it will be a trend that will probably continue going, as well as why this should be something that Western and European and Japanese devs probably should be looking at. And once again, I promise you it's not because of the wokeness either. So with that, let's discuss why is Chinese games so good and every other country games are not, at least in the eye of most gamers. So to start off the discussion, if you have more than 2 brain cells, you might honestly think the main reason these games are successful is because they are beautiful, they are single player games, they do not have loot boxes, they don't have any type of monetization system.
First, we don't call them loot boxes. I think that was
whatever term you wish to apply to them. Do you consider them ethical?
So what we look at as surprise mechanics.
That is there to manipulate you and take advantage of the people that do have tendencies for gambling or anything of random chance here, especially when it comes to financial reasons. And honestly, yeah, that is a part of this, but that is not the main reason here. The main reason is, of course, have to do with China specifically here, and with the devs being Chinese devs. It's not them making games that don't have that type of stuff because they want to affect the game or affect your time or anything of that type. It is mainly because legally they have to do it, because in China there is a content restriction and requirement for publishers to follow to release their games. And in some ways, the rise of the single player Chinese game is a system that have come into play to help deal with the restriction, as well as the requirement and also legal issues that come from making games with inside of China. And if you're not familiar with the laws that are in place, since beginning back in July of 2016, all game publisher in China, might it be mobile, might it be console or otherwise, must go through a licensing and a approval process by the National Press and Public Administration. And this situation is, of course, as you probably can gather when dealing with China, is a government body, and this operation does take part in other things such as, of course, radio, film, and TV. And since all these are running through a government agency, that means the rules are not lightly implied, as you can see in some other countries, especially here in the West. Well, adapting a rating is a constantly evolving situation from what would be mature a few years ago. It looked at as teen by today's standard. That is not the case when it comes to China specifically. Since China have very strict laws when it comes to, of course, loot boxes being pretty much straight up banned, right along with any game of chance, right along with how much time that players and especially minors can interact with video games as a whole, since there is a strong restriction of time limit set on anyone under the age of 18, locking them to only a 3 hour per day. And of course, you might be wondering how exactly do they enforce this, as well as any of the other laws that evolve around the asset to video games as a whole, any for all ages. And of course, this is thanks to China requiring every single user to submit a government ID to be registered in the system so they can end up tracking you to make sure that you are not breaking any of the laws. And a lot of these laws, if you do find ways around or way to break them, there is some very strict ramifications for you with fines as well as jail time in some cases. So as you can tell, this is something that is not something you really want to mess around with or joke about when it comes to game design here, and any more so since we have seen this stuff come over here into America, any if it don't apply to it directly. Some of you might remember the whole hullabaloo that happened around Once Human, having it in a TOS about IDs, and this is what that was referring to. So if you are someone who is playing video games in China, you very much have to abide by the laws and restriction, any more so if you're a developer when you are making games. With all that being said, the laws are mainly in place when it comes to online multiplayer games. Might it be MMOs or might it be something more PvP or esports focused here. And with that, you might start seeing a picture coming into play here with a lot of the game devs in China realizing the restriction being specifically for online and being a little more lax when it comes to single player games. And since they are losing so much money now that the laws are in place and have been for the last few years, because keep in mind, a lot of these laws have started coming into play in 2016 and slowly been added to over the last few years. And if you know anything about game dev, you will know most AAA games usually takes about 3 to 5 years to be made, produced, and released. And you will start seeing how some of these laws are starting to affect games such as Debunking, Wukong, as well as some other ones like Liza P. And you will start noticing a lot of Chinese devs have started realizing, since there are way too many legal restrictions, that it limiting how much money they can make, especially from free-to-play online games, not counting the player base that are affected by these laws. It is seeming to become more easier for them to adjust the market to start making single player games. But the thing is, when you are making single player games and you can't do the monetization, you can't do the loot box for legal reasons, what is your only real option at that point? And of course, that option is, of course, go and make good single player games or games that are good enough that you can sell that won't interfere with any of the laws. And in return, by making good games and releasing good games, then the more people who buy it, the more money you will make. And this is a aspect of the Chinese market that we have seen coming into play over the last few years, is to help them make more money and stay afloat with all the restrictions. So in return, a lot of these devs is, of course, don't get me wrong, are making great game because they want to, they have the vision, but also this is a lot of question through being boxed in for legal reasons to mainly focus on making games that can be sold. And in return, now thanks to the lifting of console games and borders with China, a lot of the games are finally starting to make their way to America, as we have started seeing over the last few years. And in return, you start seeing more games that are being made, how games used to be made here in the West and in Japan, that was about being a good game first, selling the game, making a profit by making good stuff. That is what is happening with Chinese games right now, is literally that. And thanks to the legal issues, they have really no other option than to do just that, or to just bite the bullet and continuing making multiplayer game. That is, of course, still successful, don't get me wrong, but when you look at the overall scheme of things, there is more money to be made from single player games in China as well as outside of China, and as well as we have seen with Myth Wukong, it is doing extremely great on Steam at the time of release. And that is because, let's be honest, here in the West, a lot of us gamers, especially us in the millennial Gen X camp, as well as Gen Z as well a little bit, but let's be honest, when it comes to games of yesteryear that we all desire for video game to go back to, and in return, the games are very much playing into our desire for the yesteryears and the nostalgia of what video game used to be in the 90s and early 2000s. So in return, this is just a perfect storm for the Chinese devs that just happen to be forced into a corner and having to adapt or die, as well as everyone over here in Western countries or any in Japan are really missing out on what games used to be without all the fluff of the monetization stuff. And that is the main reason why indie games are being so successful over here as well in other markets as well. So when you think about why Chinese games are doing so good in the West, it have nothing to do with, of course, pretty designs of females that is more to the male gaze, or the lack of wokeness, or any of that nonsense. This is nothing more than a legal obligation and a business obligation to make money, as well as stay afloat and not end up in prison in China. It have nothing to do with Chinese developer wanting to give you what you want, no matter how much you want to believe it is. Don't get me wrong, some of them might lean into it a little bit more than other. I'm looking at you, Force Ascendant. We all know the booty up here, and also Devil Blade. But that have more to do with the societal structure of China as a whole when it comes to beauty standards. That just happen to kind of lines up with the quote-unquote hardcore or Reddit type of gamers out here that is screaming into the void to no one but themselves and people in their own bubble. So once again, it all just a fantastic happenstance for all that, but just keep in mind the games are not being made because they want to appeal to the quote-unquote true gamers out there. It just happened to by default. So with that, hopefully you have found that video helpful understanding the situation when it comes to that part of the industry that is very much taking a foothold in the game industry, especially here in the West. And hopefully now you can understand why this is not anything to do with hotness or wokeness.